The path of an artist is full of challenges, which has pushed me to reach out to other professionals about their experiences. Join us as we explore the journeys of fine artists who have turned their passion of creating art into a profession. From their highs to their hurdles, these are real insights, breakthroughs, and triumphs to inspire other creators to reach higher. Welcome to the Business of Art podcast. Welcome to the Business of Art podcast, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. Today, we are honored and excited to have Frank Serrano with us. If you're not familiar with his work, you need to check it out, but we're going to get to know Frank today. Let me just list off a couple of the things from his bio that I feel are really relevant, and then we'll jump into his story. So Frank resides in the beautiful Owens Valley of California. He's been a full-time artist since 1993, so 30 plus years. It's awesome. Frank's early education includes studying the works of masters such as Edgar Payne, Sam Hyde Harris, Hanson Puthoff, Frank Tenney Johnson, and Maynard Dixon. He also admires contemporary artists like Clyde Aspevig, Bill Anton, and Jim Norton. Some stellar artists for sure. Frank's work has been featured in leading magazines such as Art of the West, Western Art Collector, Southwest Art, Plein magazine, and American Artist. He's a signature member of the California Art Club. He teaches painting workshops across the country. He's authored the book called Plein Air Painting in Oil, and he's produced a couple instructional DVDs that are still in circulation, it sounds like. And he was also invited by the Disney Animation Studio to teach some painting classes and advise on painting techniques for 3D film applications. So that's just a little bit of some of his bio. And Frank, welcome to the podcast. We're thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, our absolute pleasure. And you've got 30 plus years of experience. And to start off, we would love to hear your journey. Please share with us kind of your journey, how it's come about from when you were young. We want to hear all the good stuff.
Yeah, well, it started a long time ago. I actually, my mom still has drawings from when I was like 3 years old, 4 years old.
It's awesome.
And yeah, so I've always been drawing my whole entire life. It's been a lifelong, it's been a pleasure. It's been something that I've really had to do because it's just in me.
Yeah.
And so when I graduated from high school, I had studied business in school. We had this after school program called Junior Achievement, and I wanted to own my own business. I didn't want to work for anybody, so I always had that in my head that now I'm just going to do my own thing.
Awesome.
I did do art on the side. I did some commercial art to make a few bucks here and there. I got into sign painting for a little while, but while I was doing that, I bumped into this this company that asked me to do some artwork for them, and they were actually a screen printing company. So I went over to their plant and I saw how they were printing T-shirts and everything. And I thought, oh my gosh, this looks like something I'd like to do because I could do all the artwork for the shirts, and whatever.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing that, and that was my first business that I had, and I ran that for quite a while. And it became pretty big. I was doing a lot of sportswear and stuff like that. And that gave me the chance to, and the freedom to do more art. So that's how the art, the fine art started, because then I was able to do it on the side at night in my studio. Yeah. And then I just got more and more involved in that. And then I finally made the decision that I was going to do that full time and then close the business down. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long do you think that was running that T-shirt printing?
Actually, that was quite a while. I closed it just before I started my website in 97. So I was doing it in the late 80s into the 90s. Okay. And we had a recession in the early 90s, and that's pretty much one of the at that time too. I was making the decision to do more art, and then I bought my first Pashad box like in 1995. I had just a little toolbox and one of those little triangular easels I would take outside at first, but it was this big clunky thing. And so, and then I found out that there was a mom and pop in Cody, Wyoming that made Pashad boxes called Open Box M. So I got my first box back then.
That's awesome.
So, and that was really excited when I'm like, yeah, now I can go everywhere.
Yeah. So it sounds like your mom was supportive, growing up.
Oh yeah, my mom and my dad. I have to mention my dad. My dad was a aerospace engineer. He was very artistic himself. He used to take me to the library just to draw when I was a kid.
That's awesome.
And we would get a book and then we would draw out of the book, And so he encouraged it. My mom encouraged it. They were really great parents. And that was how that started with them.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear kind of some more of the details. Dick, you gave us the very aerial version of the story, but like, what was your high school experience like? Was like, as far as college went, how did that all play together?
So in school, I took everything art related that I could. And of course, back then in school, we had everything. We had art classes in elementary school. In our class, we had an art time, as well as the math and English and all that other stuff. So they really encouraged art. And then when I got into junior high and high school, then I had a separate class for art. And I remember my art teacher in 7th grade. She was awesome, and she really encouraged me to continue. I was already pretty good because I was born with that ability to draw pretty well at an early age. So it was just learning the mediums that they were teaching us, whether it was watercolor, we did gouache. It was pretty good. It was all inclusive. The art classes that we had, they had everything.
Nice.
So yeah, and that went all the way up into high school. And then in high school, I did. We had I wasn't involved in the student body at all, but they knew I was one of the better artists in school. So I designed our calendar for my senior class, and
cool.
Did all that. And I was in graphic arts in high school, which is printing class. We had printing presses and all that. And so I learned how to do that. So when I first got out of high school, that was my first job. I worked for what was called a Minuteman press. And I went in there and just that was my first vocational learning. And it was great because it paid well. And so I did that for quite a few years as I was transitioning into my own business and stuff like that.
Okay. So any college experience at all, or did you just kind of jump into the workforce?
I did have college experience, but I didn't finish college because I had started my screen printing company and I was already making a bunch of money. So yeah, I thought I'm going to be a businessman and I don't need to go through the rest of this.
And when would that have been? Like, what's the time frame around that?
So I graduated high school in 1985.
Okay.
And so 87, 88 was when I was going to college.
That's pretty impressive. I think just even culturally in our society here in the States, especially, it's like, you get out of school and you go to college, and that's kind of the path. Did you feel like you were like just going against the grain? And how did people respond to that?
So I'll tell you something about me too. I was a bookworm when I was in school. I got straight A's. I was, I respected my family, my teachers, and I wanted to do good in school. So I did really well. I had honors when I graduated and things like that. And I did get a partial scholarship to Cal Poly to go to college.
Okay.
But at the same time, I had mentioned before that I'd taken this thing called Junior Achievement, which was how to run your own business. And it was an after-school program. And that set me on that other course. And so I talked to a lot of people in business, like my boss that I was working for. He used to be, before he owned the Minuteman, he was the CEO of Stanley Door Company. So he taught me a lot of stuff about business. And I thought, I was going to college part-time at that time, at the very beginning. And I thought, wow, I don't really need this because, and if you look back now at some of these very wealthy business entrepreneurs, they didn't go to school.
Right.
It takes a risk taker. A college degree is great if you're going to become a doctor or a lawyer. You need that schooling, but there's certain things that you have to learn on the job. And it's the same with painting. I didn't really take any, besides schooling, I didn't take any classes in college for getting a degree in art. I didn't go that way because you didn't need that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I'm not discouraging anybody from getting their degree,
right?
Because it's nice to have that as a backup, and it's good to have a business degree maybe if you want to do. But it's in my situation, it wasn't that way.
Yeah. Well, I like to hear that, and not that I don't know. I think some people might think that I have a chip on my shoulder against education. I just recognize that it's not always the best route, or it's definitely not the only route to becoming a successful artist. And so I think I just want to make it very plain as I do these interviews.
Oh yeah.
And we have great examples of people who didn't get an art degree, and you develop that talent and those abilities in another way. And it was very valid, and there's, and I think probably even, a lot of times it's way more streamlined, because there's all these other things you have to take at college, like required classes, and things like that. And so you kind of cut the fluff and let's get to business, And
when I was deciding to go to college, I lived by Art Center College in Pasadena, and that's one of the best art schools for art. But it was more related to automotive and say animation and things like that, the movie business. So it wasn't necessarily traditional painting. In fact, there's many artists that went to that school back in the day, including some of the contemporary painters today, like Ray Roberts and some of these other painters. They went, but at that time, the college had a little bit more of traditional teaching, traditional art. By the time I got to it was time for me to go to college. Art Center was more of automotive design, product design, and it was a great school. If you got a degree from that school, it's great. But it wasn't traditional fine art. It wasn't landscape painting or anything like that. So that wouldn't help me at all. It would be just, I would have a degree and maybe I would be able to work in animation and do something there, or I could work for Mercedes-Benz designing cars. So it was a totally different thing. Yeah. But and also that school at the time was $7,000 a semester. That was a long time ago.
Whoa.
And so it was a pretty expensive school. And my dad said, "No, I'd rather you have a job." So, and my dad instilled with me hard work and save your money and all that type of stuff. So I'm really appreciative about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And especially with your dad having the educational background he did.
Yeah. And my dad didn't go to college.
Really?
My dad so back in the day, learning on the job was what you did. My dad was good at math, and he was an architect when he first came here to this country. My dad was French and Spanish. My mom's Portuguese. So they came from Europe. And my dad came here. He was washing dishes at a restaurant, and doing that when he first got here. And then he worked for an architectural firm because he learned a little bit back home how to do that. Then he joined the Air Force, and that's where he got his more of his education. And when he got out, he started working for Rockwell and learned on the job. And my dad had to go back to school when he was 55 years old, which I'm about that now. I'm 56. He went back to school at night to learn the computer programs that all the young guys knew already and to stay current. And I was proud of him. He did it. He went to school and he continued. He worked on the space shuttle. He worked on a lot of big, important, things. And he worked for Hughes Helicopter Company before they sold to McDonnell Douglas, and then he worked for McDonnell Douglas. So he worked for a lot of those big companies.
That's incredible.
And all without a college degree. Yeah, you couldn't do it now per se.
Right.
because you need that education with the computers and everything. But back in the day, it was like slide rule and just your calculator.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everything was hand drawn.
Sheesh.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it's a different world. It's a different world for sure.
It totally is.
But that's incredible. What a neat history. And your parents, like, immigrating to the US and yeah, that's phenomenal. What a neat background.
Yeah. Thanks.
So when you were, you had that printing, shirt printing business that you were running. How did you transition into the fine art? Like what happened there? Tell us more about that.
I was always doing fine art. I was always drawing, painting on the side. I did all the illustration work for all the companies that I, like if there was an event, they would say, do you have, somebody that could do the artwork for our t-shirt or whatever? So that was me. So I didn't have to pay an artist.
Yeah.
And it was all hand drawn. It was all hand lettering. It was before the computer. I didn't have my first Mac I got in maybe 1990.
Okay.
Something like that was my first Mac, and it couldn't do anything. All it could do was black and white lettering, right? So it helped me with the lettering department, which I love typography. That was one of the things I loved doing because I love sign painting, right?
Yeah.
So I used to do hand lettering and pinstriping on cars and stuff. I did everything.
Wow.
I had friends in all kinds of art-related businesses, and we would get together and we'd go to car shows, airbrush T-shirts. We did everything, and I have like pictures and stuff of all that. But so I was always doing art.
Yeah.
And so I used to get Southwest Art Magazine and some of these magazines back in the day, and I was flipping through the magazine one day and I saw a painting by Clyde Aspevig, and I'm like, wow, now that's a painter. That guy can really paint the landscape in it. It had a sense of realism, but it was so painterly.
Yeah.
And so he is the first one that kind of sparked me into going outside, eventually going outside, but painting in the studio, trying to emulate that realism without painting every leaf, every piece of grass. So when I was working in my business, I'd go home at night and paint in the studio. I was also back in those days down in Laguna Beach, so I had Weiland. I knew Weiland, who painted the big murals of whales on the walls, all over the world and stuff like that. So I used to go to his gallery and check him out, and I loved doing seascapes at the time because I was down in Laguna. So a friend of mine would come down from Whittier, and we would go down on the beach and sit there and just paint seascapes. But we weren't necessarily painting what was in front of us. We were just painting our own seascapes, but just being outside. and so it's kind of like, and then one day we saw this guy come out with his easel, and he was actually painting what was in front of him. So that's pretty much what sparked me to actually start doing that and going out painting plein air.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you were, I guess from the beginning, you were always doing landscapes.
Yeah.
What about like the Westerns, like the cowboys and stuff? How did that evolve?
Well, I always loved horses, and I think a lot of kids like drawing horses. And my dad, when I was younger, got me those books, the Walter Foster books on how to draw a horse, or, there were these big oversized books, that had, and it was illustrated by Walter Foster himself, because those were the original books. Yeah. And, or how to draw people, that sort of thing. So I had those books, and I used to love drawing horses. And when I was a little kid, my mom we would be at my grandmother's house. My mom would have to go somewhere, so she would drop us off at my grandma's. My grandma didn't have any paper, so she would cut out not trash bags, but the store brown bags. She would cut out sheets out of that, and then she would give me that with a pencil or a pen or a marker, and then I would draw on her kitchen table.
That's awesome.
And so I would do that, and I would always do horses and stuff. So I was always drawn to that. My dad loved watching Westerns. And I used to go over to the house later on and, walking through the back door. Hi, Mom, where's Dad? Oh, you know where he's at. He's watching, the Rifleman or something, in the living room. Yeah. So I was always into that to some degree, but I didn't become a Western painter until much later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What would you say were some of the bigger challenges that you faced in transitioning away from the regular job into the fine art full time?
Well, like anything, you're starting something new, so you're kind of going to start from scratch. So it's a little scary,
Yeah.
right? So I already had a business. I was making money. I had employees working for me. So I slowly closed that business, and eventually I did some research on painting, like, can you make money doing it? Because I saw the people in the magazine like Clyde and everything. And I started looking at their careers, and I noticed they were doing shows in the galleries. And I thought, okay, well, I have to be in a gallery then, because that was the only way you could get exposure at the time. There was no Instagram. There was no social media. There was barely even, AOL, had just started. And everybody was excited about you got mail, right? And that was it. There were no websites yet. So basically it was the exposure that you would get by being in a gallery or having your work in a magazine. And that cost a lot of money.
Right.
So that was going to be the part that was going to be tricky. And you had to have a body of work. I noticed that, you had to be good at what you do. And so I already had that ability to draw really well. So it was just learning that oil medium and going out and painting. So I would go out as often as I could. I had a friend of mine that because I didn't know any painters yet. I didn't know any of the big guys that were good at it. So I would go out with a buddy of mine and we would go up the coast all the way to Oregon, and we would just paint the coast. I had my shot box that I got, my open box down. And we would just paint seascapes, cliff scenes down at the beach, the Oregon coastline, down through California, all the way back down to Laguna. And I did that for a long time. And then I found out that there was an art organization in Laguna called Laguna Plein Air Painters. And so I joined that group and started going out with them. They would have these Monday paint outs and stuff in the canyon. And so slowly I built up my base, all the work that I needed to eventually show a gallery and try to sell. And I was selling along the way. Friends or family would buy, a piece of art from me or something like that. And then eventually I got in my first gallery. And so that was kind of the takeoff there.
Where was your first gallery?
It was in Laguna Beach. It was a gallery on Forest Avenue called Hidden Dreams. And basically it was like a Wyland gallery where there was a lot of seascapes. A lot of one of the top artists that was in the gallery was Roy Tabora, he's still painting now. He's on Oahu. I think he's on Oahu, and he's one of Hawaii's big seascape artists. And he had paintings in that gallery, and then I was doing seascapes, and but mine were mostly Laguna Beach and stuff like that. And so something that I can mention too, when I was in that gallery, they wanted me to sign an exclusive agreement. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, we don't want you to sell anywhere else, and we don't want you to sell through your studio. We just want to sell your work. Now, this goes into the whole gallery business of how do you deal with a gallery and negotiate deals and stuff like that. So a good friend of mine that I met through Laguna Plein Air Painters was Ken Oster. And sadly, he's not with us anymore, but Ken was a great mentor to me and a great artist. And I went over to his studio when they said, hey, we want you to be in our gallery, and, we want an exclusive agreement. So I went over to his studio and I said, hey, Ken, this gallery down in Laguna wants my work, but they want me to sign a contract saying that I won't sell, my work out of my studio, only through their gallery. And he told me, don't do it. And I said, well, why is that? And he says, well, if they don't give you any money to survive on, how are you going to pay your rent? How are you going to pay, if they're not selling your work right away, if they're not selling a lot of work per month, how are you going to pay your bills? Right. So, and I was a businessman before, so it made easy sense to me. So I took his advice and went back to them and I said, look, you can have my work, but I'm not signing any exclusive agreements, because unless you're going to offer me a monthly stipend to survive on, I have to pay my bills, and this is my livelihood. So, and I have my own customers. So, the work I give you is for you to sell, and the work that I have in my studio is for me to sell. And I'll give you my best work, of course, but I have to pay my bills, so I can't sign an exclusive agreement. And they agree to it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I like to hear that, because I think a lot of times, and I've had different interactions with galleries and experiences and conversations. And there have been times when, we have a real conversation about, because I have a family and I sell a lot on social media, and I go to shows and things like that. And I basically say, like, this is what I'm doing. This is how I run. And if that doesn't work for you, then this probably won't work, and I've had a whole gamut of conversations and directions that has gone, and even trying to negotiate a percentage.
Oh, sure.
Where I'm just like, cause like now it's like, if you even ask a question about, or if you try to negotiate percentages, some people get really like all worked up, and it's like, what? I thought this was a business thing, like
partnership.
I'm representing myself here, and let's have a conversation even. And so that's neat that they worked with you. As you expanded into other galleries, how did that all play out?
So early on in my career, I was in maybe 5 galleries, because that was the way you sold at that time, early in the 90s into the late 90s and even early 2000s. But for me, it was mostly in the 90s that I was in that many galleries, and I took the advice from other artists, like, put your work out there. My dad, in fact, I would paint something really nice and my dad would see it. He would come by, the studio, or I would show him, at home, and he said, wow, that's really nice. I said, yeah, I'm going to keep that one. He goes, you can't afford to keep those things. They're better off in somebody else's home on their wall. And then their friends see it, and then their friends see it. And that's how, it gets out there. Same with the galleries. The more galleries you were in at that time, the more eyes were on your work. Yeah. And more people talking about it. So for me, I knew that because in my business, I did a lot of marketing. I did a lot of promotions. A lot of it was word of mouth at the time too, but you have to do that. You have to be out there in the public eye. And for us, you could be the best artist in the world, but if you're not good at marketing and putting your name out there, you're really not going to go too far. Yeah. So it was important. And so when I got into the other galleries, that's when it became a little bit more dicey, because you're dealing with different personalities. Not every gallery is the same. So the first gallery that I was in it for a while, and then I eventually left that gallery because it wasn't the direction of the plein air work that I was doing, because he mostly wanted seascapes, and I started wanting to do other work as well, and so he wouldn't take that work, and so eventually I had to go. But when you get into when I got into these other galleries, I tried to negotiate with them, and some of them were a little bit more stern, and they didn't want to negotiate that much. So you have to, most of the time you approach them instead of them approaching you. Eventually some galleries approached me, but when you're approaching them too, you might have something written down that you want to talk to them about in terms of the percentages. How are they going to market your work? Are you going to have a one-man show? Because back then we used to have a lot of one-man shows. They don't really exist that much anymore. Unless you're really big time, they want to do group shows. They also want to do shows on Art Walk night, which is sort of a free night, because they know they're going to get a lot of people coming through. Yeah. And so you want to negotiate deals that make it more advantageous to your career, and you have to be able to negotiate. And the people that didn't want to negotiate, I just said, okay, well, it's not going to work for me, so I have to move on. So it was a big risk, because then I lost an opportunity possibly to sell some work. But then there's plenty of galleries that'll work with you. So you just have to find that fit. Yeah. For somebody maybe getting started out, what would you recommend as they're seeking out a gallery? What are some things that they could be aware of and have in mind as they're searching? I think first and foremost is you have to be able to back yourself up. You have to have good work. I mean, that's first and foremost, the work speaks for itself. If you present them with the work, sometimes, they're just the way they look at your work. They're like, wow, yeah, you're okay. We'll take you in, so sometimes it's pretty easy, but, you have to have confidence, of course, to approach the galleries and have enough work to show them because, anybody can look at your work. I mean, some artists, they'll put their best work up on social media, whatever, but what's the rest of it look like?
Yeah.
So you have to have that work to back up what you want to negotiate and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And just not be afraid. It's for some people that don't have the personality, that extroverted type of personality to go out and just chit chat and start talking to, galleries. It could be pretty tough. And if you want to make it in this business, besides the galleries, we do have social media now. So that's something that some artists pay a lot of attention to.
Right.
Did I answer your question?
I think just, from my perspective, I think because of social media and because of all these different avenues that we have to get our work in front of potential buyers, it's a different world, for sure. And I think that the gallery definitely has its place in the art market. Mm-hmm. But if an artist wants to make a living as an artist, I don't think that a gallery has to be a part of that equation. And so I think, I guess maybe I was trying to fish a little bit with the question, but what would you be looking for if you were starting out now? What would you be looking for specifically in a gallery that you would even consider approaching?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And right now, I work with a couple of galleries, but I'm not in any gallery. I used to be in, like I said, when I first started, in about 5 galleries. And that's a stretch because you have to do framing, you have inventory in all these galleries. In fact, I was talking to one of my great friends recently. He came up to paint here in the Sierra, in the Owens Valley. And we were talking about it. He goes, oh man, I have about 50 paintings in this gallery that I have to pull at least half of them out because there's some inventory with frames, expensive frames that just sit there if they're not on the wall. And
Seriously.
So as soon as he went home, he did that. But so with social media, it's changed the whole dynamic in terms of marketing yourself and selling your work. So galleries at first weren't too hip to it, I think. They were still a lot of gallery owners are older, so they were into the traditional way of selling work. They had their emails, their client lists, and, did their shows and things that way. But now more and more are on board. When I first started selling on my own through my studio too, that was in the late 90s. I started a gallery, an online gallery called pleinairgallery.com. And It was funny because other artists that were plein air painters, they go, how'd you get that name? They thought it would have been taken already or something, and that was when a lot of people were selling .coms. I don't know if you remember that, but
it was the boom.
Somebody would get Disney and they weren't really, Disney would, eventually get it from them and then they would sell it off for a whole bunch of money or whatever.
Yeah.
And I did get offered a couple times, people wanting to buy my pleinairgallery.com. And I said, no, I'm not going to sell it. And I still have it to this day. But I started my online gallery and I thought, well, wow, I could sell my work, but I could sell the work of some other artists as well if I want. So I asked some of my artist friends if they wanted to be on my online gallery, strictly online. And so I had artists like Ned Mueller, Matt Smith joined it for a bit, Ray Roberts, John Budison, Kathy Whippler. Quite a few artists actually joined the website for a while. And I had that going for a while, but eventually got to the point where, wow, I was running this online gallery, but I need to work on my own stuff. Yeah. So I kept the online gallery for a while, but then kind of just faded that out and just focused on painting. And then social media started, to come around. and I didn't really, I joined Facebook, but it was more of just a social thing, you know, with friends and stuff like that. It wasn't about selling work or anything at that time. It wasn't until Instagram that I really thought, hey, this is a good way to market the work and sell the work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let's talk about that. It sounds like you're on social media a lot, and you're no longer in galleries. So I'm assuming that you're selling through your website, through social media.
Yeah.
How did that transition, and what does that look like now?
Well, I'll be honest. It's not my favorite thing to just have to sell my own work. I would love to have a gallery that met all the requirements that I need. You know, galleries used to be different. They used to really market the artist, and there's galleries that still do that. You know, and I was in Legacy Gallery for a while. The Legacy was in Jackson Hole, Bozeman, and Scottsdale, but they closed those locations that I was in, and only have Scottsdale now. Eventually, I was selling a lot more of my work than the galleries were, so I just decided just to go out on my own because of the social media and Instagram. And they're great galleries. And if they wanted to have a show or wanted me to, be in one of their shows, I'd still do it. But it was easier for me just to do it myself. Because like I said, a lot of the galleries stopped doing one-man shows. Things happened where they were, weren't able to survive or whatever it was. And, you're still painting and you still have to keep going.
Yeah.
So thank God for social media, because then that gave us a way to show our work to the world without having to rely on the gallery or magazine ads and things like that, even though I still do magazine ads.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So was it hard to start? How did you start making your first sales on on social media? What did that look like? Was it hard to get your follow? Because what I see is I've got close to 38,000 followers at this point on Instagram. But a lot of them are artists. Mm-hmm. And I would say, I don't even know what percentage, because I don't know how to quantify that, but I would say a very small minority is actually art collectors. Mm-hmm. And then the rest are just art admirers, or other artists. Sure. And so how do you cultivate the sales on social media?
Well, basically that was organic. I really didn't do, besides just posting good work or my best work, that kind of grew organically. In fact, everybody complains about algorithms and things like that. All right. And when I first started, it was leaps and bounds. I went from, no followers to 1,000, and all of a sudden 10,000, 15,000, and it was growing like crazy. I'm only at around close to 50,000 now, because at about 37, it just stopped growing. And that wasn't me. I was still doing the same thing, but I noticed that it went from having, you would have 2,000 likes on an image, and then all of a sudden now you only have 500. And right. I had friends who lost their whole social media presence on Instagram, had to start over, and now they barely have 100 followers. It's so hard for them to even grow right now. Wow. And that was somebody, things happen where their image, their page got swiped or, got taken down hacked. For some reason, hacked. Yeah. Yeah. And it's pretty crazy. You have no control over the social media. You just have to trust that people are still seeing the work and put the work out there. I do a lot of stories. And there are a lot of artists that really know how to do social media a lot better than I do. I mean, they're on it they're celebrity status on there. They have 100, 200,000, 400,000 followers. Right. And they post 30 stories a day. I don't do that. I can't do that. I don't have the time to do that or the want to do that. But I do post really frequently, almost daily, which I find is beneficial. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And so
that's
in
good to
terms
hear,
of,
though.
huh?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, and in terms of the sales just happen. People will see an image and you'll get all these wonderful comments from people. I get comments from galleries, I get comments from other entities, and about shows, things like that. But then somebody will say, "Hey, is that for sale?" Or "What's the price on that? What's the size?" And then that's how the sale happens.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful.
So when you're posting, if it is available, do you mark it as available, or is it just kind of assumed that what you're posting is available? How do you do that?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll just post it. Hey, this is what I'm working on. And it won't even be finished yet. And somebody will go, "Hey, when you're finished with that, is it going to be available?"
Right.
Or sometimes I'll just post it and say available. It just depends on how I feel. I don't want to just throw every single painting out there available, because sometimes I like to keep these studies myself, to be able to use them for larger paintings and things like that. I had somebody just recently ask me, "Is that painting available?" And I said, "It can be, but I'm using it right now for a larger painting. So if you really want it, I'll put your name down and then contact you when I'm done." That type of thing happens a lot too.
Yeah, that's really neat. Man, so what percentage of your sales are happening on social media at this point, would you say?
90% at least.
And then the other 10% are maybe just other shows and things like that?
Shows, or if a gallery that I used to work with or something contacts me and says, "Hey, I have a buyer for this painting," or something.
Oh,
like
wow.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. Or even I have sometimes an art, an art agent will contact me, or an interior designer will contact me, say, "Hey, I saw your work at this gallery before, and I'm an interior designer. In fact, I just got contacted not too long ago by somebody who said they were outfitting this new home with Western paintings, and that was an interior designer." So I get some of that. There's interior designers on Instagram. They're looking at all the art, because they have to put furniture and art into homes, and so that's what's really neat about it. And I don't even know if the hashtags work anymore. I have no idea if they do. But I used to hashtag interior design, Western art, all those kinds of things, and I still do once in a while. I'll put Western art or art of the West or paintings of the West or whatever it is, and California art, things like that. Yeah. So I'll still do that, and maybe they work, maybe they don't. I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm still doing hashtags, but it's right now. It's like, is it actually helping? And I think you can still search via hashtags. So to me, it makes sense that I'm going to keep using them until they go away, I think. But they are a hassle.
Yeah, I only do a few. I used to watch some of my friends do 100 hashtags. I'm like, how do you even think of all those? I'm just thinking of a few.
Yeah, for a long time, I'd have them written down on a separate document, and I would just copy and paste it so that I could just throw it on there at the end. So that was one of my hashtag hacks. For a while. So.
Yeah, no, I think social media is great, and I think artists, especially younger artists that are getting into it, I'm sure they're already on Instagram, but it's important because, like I said before, your work has to be good, but marketing has to be a big part of what you do, or else your work's just going to sit in your studio, and that's an easy way to market your work.
Yeah, and there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of artists out there, right?
Yeah.
And if your work isn't at a quality that stands out from the rest, it's just you're a blur.
Well, the good collectors too. It's really funny. I'll tell you a real quick story. Back when I was in that gallery in San Juan Capistrano a long time ago, I had a collector come into that show that Gabor and I were doing, and this collector came over to my work, and she said, "Wow, you're getting better and better." And of course, I think artists always better. I thought I was already pretty good, But collectors know. Collectors are watching you, And they're not going to buy from you right off the bat. They're going to watch your career. They're going to watch your trajectory. They're going to see where you're going. Are you going to stick with it? Are you going to stay being an artist? Or are you going to quit? You know, they watch before they buy. Once they see that your work is taking off and you're going for it, then that's when they start buying from you, I think. And this collector, that's what she was doing. I have collectors that there's collectors that just want to have one of yours or two of yours. And those are collectors that come and go, right? Because they have a broader collection of more people. And then there's patrons, those patron collectors that want to help your career too. And they buy a lot of work from you. And I have had people like that in my career. Yeah. So, but they're watching. So the good work, just because you're painting and you paint one good painting, they're watching to see if you're consistent and to see if the work's getting better and better. Yeah.
Not just a one-trick pony.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. That's good stuff. So I want to shift gears a little bit here.
Sure.
Let's talk about your process.
Okay.
How do you develop? I'm assuming you still do quite a bit of plein air.
Oh yeah.
And studio. And how do you pile that all together?
So, a typical day for me is I go for a morning walk. I live here in the Owens Valley. I live just a couple of miles away from the trailhead that goes up into the eastern Sierra Mountains. So those are to my west, and then to my east I have the Inyo Mountains. And the exciting thing for me is there's a lot of history here with art. A lot of artists used to come up here. Edgar Paint, this was one of his favorite places to come to paint. Up here in Big Pine where I live, he would go up into the mountains here and paint Temple Crag and all these paintings that you've seen. A lot of them are right here by my house.
Wow.
Right up the hill. And I met his daughter in Laguna Beach. I was with Glenn Dean, and we walked into DeRue's gallery, which is a great gallery. In fact, Clint, Dee's son, is still running the business to a degree. He's selling that book, the Edgar Payne's Composition of Outdoor Painting.
Okay.
I think a lot of artists have that book. It's filled with lots of great information on composition and things like that. The book's in its 8th printing, I believe, right now.
Wow. Okay.
So, and he's still selling it. And so that book got me, more interested in Edgar Payne's work and his ideas on composition and things like that. So where I live, the history with the artists coming up here to paint is huge. And I'm very fortunate, really happy to be living here. Maynard Dixon was another one who came into the Owens Valley and painted a lot from 1919 to the early 1930s. And there's a huge exhibition with his work right now at the Nevada Museum of Art. It's probably one of the largest that's ever been at that museum. And it'll be up until the end of July. I've already been to it like 3 times.
Nice.
And so when I started painting here, I used to seek out some of the locations that those guys painted and just wanted to find out, what they experienced painting there, the times of day and things like that. So for me, my daily routine is getting outside, getting some fresh air, looking at the mountains, and then I'll come back to the studio. And I get up pretty early, about 5:30. The sun's already out, and I have my morning coffee. I either come back into the studio if I'm working on a studio piece, or I decide to go to a certain location outside and paint plein air. And that's my routine pretty much every day.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, of course, I have friends come into town. They go, hey, take me here, take me there. And I know all the locations, so I'll do that. But plein air painting for me, that was my career. That's what started my whole career, is getting that pochade box, going outside, painting from life. Because my studio paintings were all from photographs before.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal to go paint plein air. It was super exciting because I got to travel places.
Yeah.
And, back then the national parks weren't flooded with people like they are now either. You could easily go to a national park and find a spot. And get a camp spot. I would go to Yellowstone. I used to go to Jackson Hole every year for the Fall Arts Festival. Yeah. I used to go up there. And that's how I eventually got into Legacy. Scott Jones was the gallery manager and a really great guy. and another artist friend of mine introduced us, and he started following my work and eventually asked me to be a guest artist in Legacy. So I'm very grateful for Scott and being able to be a part of Legacy Gallery.
Scott Jones is a great guy.
Yeah.
I hope I would love to have him on the podcast eventually. So.
Oh, you should. Yeah, you should. So, and he was very encouraging. He gave me my break with Legacy, and because I was going to Jackson Hole, I had to sell these paintings somewhere. I had all these paintings from Jackson Hole, and I could sell them on social media, but I had just kind of started my social media, so it wasn't big at that time.
Yeah.
But I used to go up there. I used to camp out at Jenny Lake for like 10 days, with Aaron Schur and another friend of mine. And in fact, we went up there one year and there was these fires. So everything was like really moody because of the smoke. So, and early on in my career, I was known for painting a lot of atmosphere. I loved painting very moody atmospheric pieces, almost tonal. My seascapes had a lot of silvery type of atmosphere. And that was sparked by one of the early California guys, Sam Hyde Harris. He was known for painting backlit atmospheric scenes of his where he painted in Altadena, Pasadena, Southern California areas, Sunset Beach down by the beach. And everything he painted had that depth to it because of the atmosphere. And to me, that was something that I loved drawing. When I was a kid, I used to want to draw things, make them look close and far, and we would have to do that atmospheric thing, all black and white with a pencil or whatever.
Right.
So that was an easy fit for me to do that atmospheric work. So, and painting from life, like I said, was the way to go. That's how you did it. I learned that Clyde Aspevig did it that way. When I met Matt Smith eventually in 1999, he was always going out and painting outdoors. There was a lot of other artists that I didn't know yet, but I knew that they painted outdoors, and eventually I met a bunch of those guys as well throughout my career.
So I keep hearing from a lot of people that plein air painting is massively important, or painting from life. And I agree with it. I don't do as much of it as I probably should or would like at this point. But what is it about it that is such a great teacher? Like, what about painting from life makes that shift for an artist?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, and it's an easy question because and early on, before we had digital photography, before we had social media and a plethora of stuff online that you could look at, and of course, digital is a lot better than the old photography. We used to have to go out. I remember going on a trip, like say with my friend Gabor, and saying, "Hey, do you have enough slide film?" Because that's what we used to take photographs of nature when we would go out painting. We would go out paint plein air, and painting from nature, painting from real life, whether it's a model or painting a still life outside in your backyard or painting, the landscape. Your eyes are much more sensitive than a camera.
Right.
The little nuances that you could see in the shadows. And one thing that I learned from a lot of these painters because I never took a workshop. I didn't have the money when I first started. I had to save all my money that I had from my previous business and stuff to survive, because I knew painting at the very beginning was going to be very lean. I wasn't going to be making a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it was just banking my money and just saving it. And I already had the ability to draw really well. So it was just learning the medium. And workshops, it seemed like a lot of people that took workshops at the time were, there were some retirees, there were young people, but they wanted to learn how to draw as well. And I didn't need the drawing part. I just needed how to learn the medium. So I didn't have the money to spend $500 or whatever at that time to go, and the time to travel to, Montana and get a hotel room and all that kind of stuff, because that was added to it. So I thought, I just need to go do it myself. And I don't recommend it for everyone, because there's people that still need a lot of guidance But because I had that ability to draw, which I encourage, you're really good at drawing because your animals and stuff, they look really great. But some people need that education, a drawing education. And I thoroughly recommend that because anybody can paint, but not everybody can draw. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So you could be an abstract painter and you don't need that skill to draw that much in that. As an abstract painter, you need other skills like how to design and things like that. But drawing, you're not doing a figure or face or proportions of an animal or a horse. So, some people need that. But so going out painting plein air was huge. And it was something that really helped my work because, again, that sensitivity to seeing color in the shadows. And that didn't come at the very beginning. If you looked at my early work, my shadows were kind of dark. They were the color that they're supposed to be in general, but there are little nuances in there that eventually, as you become a better painter, reflected light, things like that maybe you didn't see at the very beginning. And that takes years to establish. It's organic. It doesn't happen overnight. And so that was a big key, a big part of it. And the photography, like I said back then, whether it was Kodak film or Fuji film or whatever film you used, they had a limited variety of colors, like 70 something colors in their print film, where slide film had a couple hundred maybe, or 300. I don't remember what it was. And in order to look at the slides, we used to have this thing called a caramate, which was like a TV set with a slide reel on the top of it. And we would put the slides all in this carousel on the top. And then you have a button and you click and it'd go to the next photo. And you're looking at it through a 12 by 12 inch screen that had a light bulb behind it. So it would have a hot spot, Yeah. And so it wasn't that accurate either, but it was better than print film. But eventually digital photography came in. My first digital camera, I think, had 2 or 3 megapixels, and you were able to use that.
That's awesome.
Got a little bit better. But that's plein air was a big part of starting out. And I didn't do the plein air circuit of going to every show either, because a lot of artists have done the plein air circuit, going show to show to show. And I just picked and chose a few that were near me. Because that's a big risk as well. You're going clear across the country to do a plein air show, and the people don't know you across the country yet. Right. They don't know your work. And so you might not sell anything. And then you just spent a bunch of money getting out there. Yeah. So I kept it close to home. Yeah. And picked the best ones. Yeah. And that really helped the namesake as well, too, at the very beginning before social media, was getting your name known out there by doing some of these plein air events. Yeah. So from the conversation we've had so far, it sounds like you've always been really, really careful. And I like to hear that, when you kind of got out of the t-shirt business, you had saved a lot of that money with the intention of having at least a nice cushion that you could then work with and have income, or at least your expenses met, so that you could grow into that art career. Right. And so you had that lump sum. So, and then you kept it close to home. You were just always economically very, very cautious, very aware of all that, those issues that were facing you, building a reputation, building a name. And then I'm assuming now you've probably done shows across the country. But not so much shows as much as teaching workshops. Okay. So that's another thing. So once I became a full-time painter back in the early 90s, I had the galleries selling my work. I was selling some of my own work. The collector would come by my studio once in a while because there was no way to do social media at that time. Right. And I knew early on, being in business, that I needed that extra income. And where was it going to come from? I wasn't going to get another job. So I thought, wow, I could teach. Yeah. So I started doing workshops in Laguna Beach. My first workshop, I had 2 students. That's it.
That's awesome.
And one was my aunt, my dad's my dad's sister, and because she was a painter, she loved to paint. My dad's side of the family was a little bit more creative, artistic. And so she said, "Oh, I want to take your workshop." So I said, "Well, I'm doing one at Laguna Beach," and only one of the ladies showed up. So I had two, but you got to start somewhere, and you can't be afraid,
Right.
I wasn't going to cancel it just because I had two people, and one was my aunt, So I did that, and I thought, how am I going to grow this workshop? I can't afford to put magazine ads because, you could put those little ones in the back of the magazine. They used to have these little tiny ones that were the size of a business card.
And
but
you need a magnifying glass.
You're right. But who looks at that? It's like, it's so random. So what I decided to do was I made postcards and I made flyers. And whenever I met somebody when I was painting out at the beach, I would hand them out. Right. Wow. And the people that would come to you, they had the excitement about what you were doing. They already had it in them pretty much. "Oh, I love what you're doing." Or, "Oh," and then I would ask them, "Oh, do you paint?" "Oh, a little bit. I dabble at home." I go, "Hey, where I teach classes here." And I would hand them a flyer.
Yeah.
And so eventually I got more artists that way. And then Walter Foster, that book, it's funny how things come full circle. That book that my dad used to buy me when I was a kid, my studio was about a half a mile away from their office.
Huh.
So I sent them one of my postcards, and they called me. Said,
"What?"
"Hey, yeah. They called me and they go, "Hey, we got your postcard. Would you be interested in doing a book?" And I said, "Well, heck yeah."
That's awesome.
And they were only about a half a mile away from my studio. I was in Laguna Hills.
Wow.
I was in a business park. I had an 1,100 square foot studio space with a big loft in the back, big roll-up door. And I actually rented some of my space out to another buddy of mine for a little while, a New York artist, Peter Bergino. Shout out to Peter Bergino. And so Pete, rented some space for me, and we had a good old time. We'd have painting parties and stuff like that. But anyway, so the girls from Walter Foster came over to my studio and presented me with this idea of doing the book. And they wanted me to do that big oversized book. And I'm like, that's a great, opportunity. But I since learned that you do this smaller book called the Library Series book. It was only about, 10 inches tall by 8 inches wide. And I thought if I was able to do that book, people could take that book with them painting. They could put it in their backpack and take it with them. And if they needed a little bit of guidance, they could pull the book out and look at it. And so they said, "Well, that's not what we want you to do. We want you to do the big book." And I said, "Well, take it to your boss, because see if he'll go for that." And again, I'm the negotiator. I'm not gonna settle.
You're right.
And so the smaller book had 64 pages in it. The larger book only had about 30 pages in it, but it was huge. You're not going to take that with you.
Right.
And so they went back to their boss, and he agreed to it. So awesome. I did the Library Series book, and I tell you what, that was golden. As soon as that book came out, I started getting calls, like people wanting to take the workshop, because I had my website, plannergallery.com, so they were contacting me at my website.
Yeah.
The book, they approached me in the year 2000 to do the book, and I had it published and out by 2002. I had to do all the photography. And again, there was no digital stuff going on really. It was actually, I had a photographer friend that had the studio across from me. He had a space across from me, and he would take my pictures of my paintings for me because it was all slides. So when you would have to enter a show, you would send them a slide or a color transparency, to the show. So he would do that for me. And so he taught me how to take the pictures properly for the book, using a gray card, metering it to the gray card, and then putting your painting there and taking the picture. So the color corrections would be all good.
Nice.
And so the book came out in 2002, and once it got out there, it just exploded, really. And then shortly after I did the book, they asked Scott Burdick to do one, plein air painting in watercolor.
Okay.
So he did one, and then that snowballed into other things. American Artist magazine was really big at the time. Stephen Doherty, one of my dear friends, was the editor at that magazine and asked me to do the first convention that I ever did, which was called the Methods and Materials Show. And Morgan Wiesling was a teacher there. They only had a few teachers, me, Morgan Wiesling, and maybe a couple other artists, because it was a kind of a small convention and it was more about supplies and that thing. And so, so that the book really just, for me, was because it's your name.
Yeah.
That's what this business is. It's good work, but it's your name.
Yep.
And so that really helped with that, the whole teaching thing.
So what would you, if you had to start over, let's say hypothetical, Frank Serrano's a nobody knows who you are.
Yep.
And it's 2024.
Yeah.
How would you approach beginning your painting career?
Well, I'd be a young person, so I'd probably be on social media already. So that would be number one.
Yeah.
Just putting your work on social media. The big thing with social media now, though, too, is most of the galleries are on board. At first, they weren't on board necessarily.
Right.
I had to pull teeth to get some of my the galleries to really push the work on social media, because they weren't really doing it. They didn't know. Right. They were still doing it old school, and of course, you're a hungry artist. You want to sell your work. You want people to collect your work. And when, you had these two, they weren't two competing things. They actually help each other now, and everyone sees that. But back then, it was they seemed like they were competing. So they go, well, we do it this way, and we don't do it this way.
Yeah.
And so I would definitely be big time social media. But I would also focus on doing good work. It's not just about posting a painting a day or whatever. It's making sure that that your work can stand up to what you're putting out there, and making sure that the collectors are going to be interested in your work, and trying to get into the shows, because more than the galleries, I think some of the shows are really important in pushing the artist's career forward. Yeah. Because when you're in a show and you get the recognition from a show, then the galleries look at you that way too. They'll go, hey, we want to represent you. We saw you sold all your paintings at the show.
Yeah.
And that's happened for me throughout my career doing shows. I was in the Laguna Beach Invitational. I'm actually going to be in it this year. I haven't done a plein air event in 12 years, I think, 12 or 14 years.
Oh,
and
awesome.
They contacted me and asked me if I would like to do the show. So I thought, you know what? I haven't done one in a long time. And I'm thinking maybe some of these Laguna collectors forgot about me. So I'll do it. Let's do it. I want to have some fun. I want to meet some of these newer artists that I don't even know, because the whole plein air scene is different now. I mean, I'm old school. I'm with some of the guys that started, doing the shows back then, and a lot of them don't do them anymore,
Yeah.
I've been a part of many art clubs. I'm in the California Art Club. From the beginning of my career, I was in the California Art Club. I was in La Papa when I first started, and then I moved away, so I stopped, but now I rejoined. So I'm in La Papa again. Nice. I was asked to be part of the Plein Air Painters of America, but because I want to focus on my area here and paint most of my area, I decided that I didn't really want to travel too much with having to do their shows and things like that. So I respectfully bowed out of being part of the Plein Air Painters of America, but I was very honored that they asked, and a lot of my friends are in that. And so it's really good to be a part of those, especially early on. Plein Air Painters of America is a great organization. In fact, when I first started, I wanted to be in that, but it was so exclusive and so tight that there was no way to get in. You had to be a guest artist, and there were a lot of artists that wanted to do it. And so I just I just decided to focus on just being a good painter and didn't worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so make sure your work is as good as you can get it.
Well, you're always learning. So,
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's always going to improve.
Yeah.
You're just going to get better and better.
So maybe even more so, just focus on just consistent work, right?
Yeah.
Just consistently working your craft, getting on social media, applying for shows. Anything else you would suggest or that you would do?
Everybody has their own idea and the direction that they want to go with their career. Some people just want to be in the shows. Some people just want to sell work consistently through their studio. But I think when you're young and no one knows who you are, you have to put your work out in front of the public eye. So the shows are really important. And being in a reputable gallery, it's these days it's not going to end your career, or it's not going to, it'll only help your career to be in as many places as you can be.
Yeah.
But it's not the sole source of your income. In fact, there's a lot of painters that are great painters and they don't even worry about selling their work so much. They just like teaching. So they focus on teaching, Yeah. I did the teaching thing when I got with American Artist Magazine. I did the teaching for quite a while because I also had the book. Yeah. And so I was getting called. And when you were asking about going across the country to do a plein air show, I didn't really do that. I did actually workshops. So if somebody would call me from Nashville or Maine, Vermont, and I met a lot of great people, a lot of other artists that way, because they would be part of an organization, like say in Vermont, and asked me to come and teach a workshop. And I made a deal with them. I didn't charge per student. I charged per day for the entire group of people because that was more guaranteed income for me.
Yeah.
And so that was a way to help them out, being able to go there and not have to say, I can't come because you don't have enough students. I would come if they had 4 students or if they had 20. Yeah. Because I just charged them a per day rate. Yeah. And I was satisfied with that amount of money, and they were satisfied with paying that amount of money. And then they paid for my travel expenses, and they put me up in like a bed and breakfast or something like that. So it was great.
That's awesome.
And I didn't even need a car. I said, I don't even know where to go. So if somebody wants to drive me around, that's great. So that's how that worked out. Yeah. Yeah. But I also didn't want to be being stuck at teaching my whole career. So now I don't really teach group workshops anymore. After COVID, I decided that I was just going to do private. So I do mostly one-on-one.
So is that going to be with like local artists or people that are willing to travel to you? How does that work?
Most of the people have traveled. In fact, I had somebody come from Alaska. I had people from LA, people from other, some people just jump in their camper with their husband or wife, and the husband goes fishing while the wife paints, but it's one-on-one, which I feel you get a lot more out of it because I'm right by your side. I'm not leaving you and going off to another student during that time. And it's really focused and condensed. It's 3 days long or 2.5 days. So you get a lot of information in that time. You don't need to do a 5-day workshop with me just to do a private workshop.
Right. Yeah. I could see that. A day or two with that pure one-on-one would be incredibly helpful. Yeah. So it sounds like you definitely promote people learning from other artists, workshops. I have to look at my growth, and workshops have been massively important. Not that I did a lot of them. Yeah. But it was like I was working on my own, doing my thing, and I was kind of hitting these walls that I recognized they were walls, but I didn't know what I didn't know. I'd go to a workshop and see an artist do something, and I'd be looking for that one thing. Okay, that's where I get stuck. What does he do? And bam, it was like, there it was. Oh my gosh, and I'd pick their brain or whatever. And to me, that was massively helpful. to
I totally agree
have
with
those
that.
breakthroughs, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I used to talk about that early on, where even in my career, I hit this wall, and I'm like, okay. So when you're young and you're starting out, you get through these walls pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
But then as you become really good at painting and you become better, and you want to get to that next level, those breakthroughs are further away,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And it's something that another artist or a mentor can help you with. So I totally agree with keeping communication with your other artist buddies, maybe having critiques, things like that.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't take workshops because I decided that I didn't want to waste my finances on having to travel and take a workshop. Now, I would have took a workshop at the very beginning with Clyde, but Clyde, his last workshop was in 1994, and I didn't even know he was teaching. He was living in Loveland, Colorado at the time.
Yeah.
And he was teaching out of his, he had a church that he had purchased, an old church where his studio was.
Wow.
And a friend of mine told me after the fact that I took a workshop with Clyde in 94, in Loveland. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. I would have loved it. And that was before I knew him, right? I didn't know Clyde at the time.
Yeah.
And this is another thing. I'm glad we're having this conversation because there's so many facets to what we do.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to become friends with these other artists. Don't just think you know everything or stay in your studio and think you're going to learn everything on your own.
Right.
Now, artists say that they're self-taught. I could say that I'm self-taught because I didn't really take a workshop. But I'm not. I learned from other artists. I went to museums. I called them up and stopped by their studio. I bugged them. I stood behind them at an art show that I wasn't participating in, and I watched them paint.
Yeah.
Before I got into the Laguna Beach Invitational, I volunteered to be there to help out, just to walk around and meet all these people that I didn't even know, these other artists.
Yeah.
So, I definitely think that there's ways to learn besides traditional. Nothing's really traditional. You can find your own path.
Yeah.
But it's definitely key to learn from those people that, just like in business, I went to other shops and worked with these guys and said, hey, look, I don't do this type. I didn't do embroidery at the time, like doing an embroidered hat, a baseball cap or something. So I went to another shop and say, hey, I can get this work. Can I work with you, and I'll farm it out to you? You could do the work for X amount of money, and then I'll turn around and sell it to my customer. And so I did that. And then I learned how they did it and eventually bought my own equipment.
Yeah.
So, you learn that way. And so going to another artist's studio, seeing how they set up their studio, how they set up their palette. I paint with a very limited palette. I paint with a limited amount of colors, maybe 6 or 7 colors. And I learned that from Kevin McPherson.
Okay.
Because Kevin had a book out a long time ago on painting with a limited palette. I think it was called Painting Light and Color. And basically 3 colors were his thing,
Wow.
And so I paint with the 3 primaries, and I mix all my grays. I don't buy gray. I learned how to mix grays out in the field because I was painting all these atmospheric, paintings of silvery morning seascapes and things like that. And I learned how to mix all my grays and that way. And and I was known for that. People wanted to buy more of my gray day paintings more than they wanted to buy the sunny, colorful paintings.
Yeah.
And people thought I didn't know how to paint color for a while. They go, you don't paint that much color. I go, well, I paint what nature presents itself to me, and I copy nature. That's the best teacher,
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm interested. You're talking about your palette, limited palette. It was when I did the workshop with Greg Beecham. That's kind of where I started limiting my palette.
Yeah, great painter.
And man, like, talk about just remove problems out of mixing color. Obviously it doesn't. You have to learn how to mix it.
Sure.
But like getting color harmonies and getting your colors to feel unified and to work together beautifully, you limit your palette, and there's no way around your colors not harmonizing.
Bingo.
You know? And that was such a game changer for me.
Oh, for me too.
Yeah. So
because when I started in the studio,
yeah.
I had like 20 colors. I didn't know what I was doing.
you get the whole spectrum, and nowadays we have so many colors that are available to us that it's like you can have everything under the sun, plus stuff with like glitter in it, you know. But I don't paint with glitter ever.
Okay.
Just throwing that out there. But I want to know, what is your palette? What's your 7 colors that are on your palette? What do you use?
Well, it's probably more like 8. Now that I look at it, I'm looking. I actually have my iPad sitting on my palette right now. Actually, so I have titanium white's the only white I use.
Okay.
It's a cool white, so if you want to get warmer tones, you have to mix it with your warm colors. But I don't. Some painters believe in mixing. They have a cool and warm of their primaries. I believe that just painting with a limited palette. I have Cad Yellow Pale from Winsor Newton. I mostly use Winsor Newton, but I also use Gamblin. I'm not. If somebody introduces a color to me, like say, "Hey, you got to try this Holbein color," I'll try it. If I like it, I might add it to my palette. Yeah. But most of the time, it's Winsor Newton brand paints. In fact, when I was teaching early on, I had a deal with Winsor Newton where they would sell me paint at a reduced rate, so I could give it to students.
Nice.
Eventually Gamblin. I worked with Gamblin for a little bit too, and they would send me free tubes of paint. But I didn't have a choice. They would send me, a free box of paints, and I would just give them away to the students and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would always emphasize a limited palette. So titanium white's my white. My yellow is Cad Yellow Pale, ultramarine blue or French ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and it's not permanent, just the regular.
Okay.
Burnt sienna, yellow ochre. Those are my main stay colors right there.
Yeah.
The only green I have is phthalo green, a yellow shade from Winsor Newton. They call it Windsor green.
Okay.
And then in the fall, I introduced some other colors. I have one other blue that for the longest time, I only used ultramarine blue for everything, for the sky, for everything. And then I can mix it with phthalo green to get brighter sky colors and things like that.
Yeah.
But I use some cobalt. So I have cobalt on the palette too.
Okay.
But in the fall, I introduced Cad Yellow, another Cad Orange, a Cad Orange Light, Cad Red Light, so I can get some of these fall colors. And and since I painted mostly tonal paintings early in my career, in fact, I could show you one if you want to see it. I have to get up and get it. Yeah. It's a seascape, but it's very, very tonal. Let me just get it.
Yeah. We'd love to see it.
Okay. So this is a typical, very high-key seascape painted in the afternoon in Santa Barbara.
Nice.
And I don't know if you can see the subtle colors, but there's a lot of subtleties in there in the grays.
Right. Yeah.
So that was typical of what I used to paint. This is an older painting, and it's typical what I used to paint down to Laguna, Palos Verdes Peninsula, which is between Laguna and Santa Barbara. Is another place where they had big cliffs that I used to love going to paint. And if I got there at 7 a.m, this is what it looked like because the sun was coming up and it was right in front of me. I love painting backlit scenes as well.
Yeah,
because
that is beautiful.
It simplifies the whole painting when you're painting backlit. You're painting mostly silhouettes. And there's a power and a mood to something like this as opposed to painting direct light or side light where you're painting a lot more detail.
Yeah.
So I was into really moody paintings at the time.
Yeah.
And I used to go to all the big museums and stuff, and I would be drawn to like a Monet of the haystacks painted in the fog and things like that.
Right.
And some other painters, when I would go to DC and go to the National Gallery, things like that, and just see a lot of them were doing backlight, you know, like they were painting into the sun, and you know, you have to protect your eyes, of course, maybe, you know, have an umbrella or something like that. But I found out for me, especially another thing that I used to paint early on in my career because I like the hazy light was cityscapes.
Okay.
So I would go downtown LA to these like really bad areas because that's where all the cool bridges were and stuff.
Okay.
And paint these scenes backlit in hazy light, because then I didn't have to paint every window in the building.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I don't have any of those paintings. Those paintings sold right away to collectors. In fact, I had one collector in LA that owns like 30 of them. Like,
wow.
I would post it or send out an email, and he would be the first one to call me. And I had to start holding some of them back because I didn't want him to have all of them. You know, I wanted other people to have them.
Right.
But he was always on it, and super nice guy, just lovely man, and just loved collecting. He loved collecting cars and my cityscapes. Real cars and little die-cast cars.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the limited palette really forced me to learn how to think about values too, more than anything. Because you could be the best colorist, but if you don't have the right values, it just doesn't work. Yeah. It just doesn't work. And, you know, when I was a kid, I mentioned I used to go out and draw. We used to go to Europe. My painting, I would go to Europe with my parents. And we would go to the art store in France or wherever, and they'd buy me a pad of paper and pencil, and everything was black and white. And I would paint a boat dock with a boat and stuff, and then the buildings or the little town in the distance, and it would be all shaded in values. So I learned my values early on. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know. It wasn't like I was an expert and I knew values were important when I was a kid, you know? It just happened that way. Yeah. And I'm glad, you know? Yeah, that's awesome. Man, time flies. We're well into this. So, man, I really enjoy this conversation, and I love where it's going. And I think this is all valuable information. I'm trying to think, you know, you talked about like an umbrella, or what are some of like the tips and tricks for somebody who's just getting started into plein air? What would be some things that would help them to have a good experience that would kind of bypass some of the learning curve? Well, I think the biggest thing when you're going outdoors to paint, you want to be as compact as possible, because it's no fun lugging. When I used to teach workshops, I would have, and I understood this because people couldn't carry backpacks maybe or something. So an older person might want to pull a cart or something. Yeah. That's understandable. But if you're a young person and you're getting into this and you want to go to some of these really great places to paint, maybe you have to hike, just stay as compact as possible, because there's so many companies now that sell pochade boxes, and even little tiny ones. You know, Brian Mark Taylor has his Strada easel. Open Box M sadly is not around anymore, but I have one of their little 6x8 boxes that I could throw in, you know, I could paint in the front seat of the car, you know, with it or whatever. But when going out, especially if you're painting in certain types of weather conditions, you don't want to be just lugging all this stuff. So a small pochade box, a limited palette, your hat, maybe a windbreaker, your jacket, your sunscreen, you know, all those essentials of being outdoors to protect yourself, you need definitely. And keep it, you know, they have that saying, keep it simple, stupid. You know? Right. Yeah. It goes through a lot of different things, but it really works when you're going out to paint plein air. And also, before I go out to paint outdoors, I put all my paints in my box. I don't wait till I'm out there. I get ready inside my studio. I put everything. I get up at 5, get my stuff all squirted out in my palette, make sure my thinner can is full. My linseed oil, because that's all I use for you know, out in the field, is to loosen up the paint, especially if it's cold or something. Yeah, you know, extend the paint. And I make sure everything is all set up. So when I get out there, I just open up the box and go. because the light is fleeting. You know, if you go out and paint,
right.
You have a limit. Sometimes you have a limited window. So
Yep.
I mentioned that Maynard Dixon show up in Nevada. So I go up there, and there's some paintings in the show of Lone Pine, which is just south of me. And he met up with a family down in Lone Pine in 1919. It was a woman that used to live in San Francisco that he was friends with. She eventually moved to Lone Pine, and that was his connection in my area down in Lone Pine.
Okay.
Which is like 40 minutes south of me. And so a lot of his paintings in that show are of Lone Pine or that area. And after the show, I thought, I'm going to go find out if I can find a couple of these places. I'm going to, maybe ask a couple people if they know where this is. But I was able to find one of them on my own. And it was the Inyo Mountains in the morning. And it was painted probably right when the sun came up, just about. And I found the spot. It was a dry lake bed with some sagebrush off into the distance, and then the mountains with all these contours and beautiful shadows. Maynard Dixon's work is just all of this beautiful design of shadows and light. And I'm thinking, well, maybe he edited it and made it up himself, and maybe he changed things, because artists do that.
Yeah.
He didn't. It was exactly the same.
Wow.
But it lasted 1 hour. So you didn't have time to do a bigger plein air painting. You had to do, a 9x12 or something like that. And that's what I did. And, but I remember I was with a friend of mine painting, and I said, it's gone. It's like we were through 3/4 through the painting, but the scene was gone.
Yeah.
So you had to just pretty much focus on what you saw, your visual memory, to finish the parts that you had left to do.
Yeah.
Or you could come back the next day at the same time, and do that. And some artists do that. They go back 2 or 3 times.
And hope that the lighting is similar.
Yeah, because the next day it could be cloudy,
right?
To be washed out. But
yeah.
So you have limited time sometimes. Sometimes you have 3 hours, which is great. Just depends on the time of day you go out. I don't usually paint at sunset very often because that's even quicker.
Right.
And you only have time for a little 6x8 or something just to capture a few colors.
Yep.
But you don't have time to work on the design necessarily or details, So so it's really important to be compact and make sure that and I thoroughly recommend that any beginner stay limited with their palette.
Yeah. So how do you use your studies in your studio work? How does
that's a good one.
Yeah. How does that come into play?
Well, early on, I didn't necessarily use my studies that much to paint bigger paintings. Because I painted my studio from photographs a lot. When I would go out somewhere, I would paint the plein air paintings, of course.
Yeah.
But then when I wanted to pick something big, maybe that wasn't what I wanted to do big, so I used my photographs. But I used the small studies for the color and the value.
Yeah.
On that other image. That was, because the colors that I painted outdoors were more natural.
Right.
Like I said before, your eyes are very sensitive to color and value. So that's what helped my studio paintings look more natural. Like now you can't even tell whether I did it outside or inside from a photograph or not, because I had a lot of that visual memory and that ability to tap into that. But
because of the years and years and years of painting outside, right?
Years.
Yeah.
Years. Yeah.
Yeah. You're fluent in that language, basically.
Yeah. And also the knowledge and help I got from my artist friends. I wouldn't be able to be where I'm at now without, my friends that I painted with, learning little things from them.
Yeah.
Matt Smith is very much I learned craftsmanship from Matt, the brushwork.
Oh man.
I don't paint like Matt.
Yeah.
I don't paint like Matt, but it's a real big part of, painting is the craftsmanship, the brushwork. I love when a collector goes, God, I love that brush stroke right there. And I learned that from several artists. Matt was the first one that I learned that craftsmanship, because I used to watch him hold his brush painting, and it seemed like he cared about that. a lot, right?
Yeah.
Where some people are just like, scrubbing in the paint, and just putting in blobs or dabs. Like I tell my students, don't dab, because everything looks the same. Pay attention to what a bush looks like, or a rock. A rock has hard edges and thick paint, where a bush is more scrubbed in, maybe like a sagebrush or something like that. Yeah. So that's another thing when you're painting outdoors, is you don't want every object to have the same brushwork necessarily.
Yeah.
And especially because of you want it to look like clumps of hair or something, like on a bear or on a bison, so you're changing it up, to make that look the way you want it to look. And there was an artist named Ru Li. I'm friends with a lot of the Chinese painters because they came here to LA when I started with California Art Club. Mian Situ is a good friend of mine. My friend Simon Locke.
Wow.
Mian has if you ever had a chance to interview him, he has a really interesting story about coming from China. And stuff.
I bet. Oh man, I would love
those are real big stories. So Ru Li was a really amazing painter. He's still around. He doesn't live here anymore. I think he moved back east to the south somewhere. But I watched him paint at the Mission in San Juan Capistrano. We had a plein air paint out. The California Art Club used to do that with the Joe and Irvine. It was a big event where a lot of the California Art Club artists would paint. And Ru Li, everybody used to watch Ru Li because he would mix his color, but not all the way to where just everything blended. It had a variegation about it. Yeah. And then you put a brushstroke down, and in that brushstroke, there would be like 3-4 colors.
Like marbling through it, right?
Like a marbling. But it came across as one color.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, man, I just like... And I remember Josh Clare talking about him too, because Josh took a workshop with him down in Laguna. I think it was down in Laguna. Yeah. And his brush technique, his brush work was amazing. So I pay attention to that when I'm painting any one of my paintings here, especially when I'm painting rocks. In fact, this painting, you can see the rocks in this painting. They have a lot of color and variegation, a variegated color about them.
Yeah.
It might be a little hard to see, but, and then each artist that I learned from over the years, studying their work, whether I went to one of their shows, or I have tons of catalogs from Clyde's one-man shows to Matt's to just a lot of different artists. I love books. Yeah. I don't know if you love books.
I like collecting them, but I find that I rarely get them out and look at them like I should. But sometimes I'll be going through my studio and I'll pull it out and like, man, I should be looking at these a lot more than I do.
Yeah, yeah.
I just get that tunnel vision and I just forget about all that stuff. So,
yeah, no, the books are, and I still reference older paintings. I still look in, when I say I'm working on something new, I'm like, oh, I think James Reynolds painted something like that at that time of day. I wonder what he did. Yeah. And I'll break out the James Reynolds book and flip through it, I'm really happy because I started at the time when a lot of these artists were still up and coming themselves, but they were a little further along where they were, that's what I wanted to get to their level, and there were still a lot of those great artists still around. Some of them have passed away already, but to me, those are moments that I'll cherish, so camping trips with other artists and things like that, those are just like, you just can't buy that stuff.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think art can be really lonely.
It is.
When we're in our studios a lot, just keep
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. And so it is important. Like when I go to an art show, I'm more excited about just connecting with my art friends than anything, just like I want to sell art by all means, but it's like a family reunion with my people, and I just love, and you go through the rooms or the displays and look at the work and talk about the work and talk about, oh man, how did you get that? Or I can't believe you pulled that off. Like, you're so gutsy. Like, in all those conversations that are just so fun to have, where you bring out all the jargon, it's we're just geeking out art, 24/7.
Yeah.
For at least a few days, and oh man, that's important. It is. It really is important to have those connections.
So I did this thing. I totally agree. And you talk about geeking out. I did this event so Stephen Doherty, I mentioned, he did this convention a long time ago, before the Plein Air convention. It was called he did this one eventually. I'll just talk about that one. He went from doing this one convention that I did early on with him called the Methods and Materials Show, and then he decided that they were going to do this thing called Weekend with the Masters. Okay. And he contacted me, and it started in Colorado Springs. I want to say it was like 2007 or 2008, something like that, when it happened. The first one happened, and he calls me up. He goes, "Hey Frank, I'm thinking about doing this new thing called Weekend with the Masters, and I'm going to invite Richard Schmid, Scott Christensen, Kwang Ho, Dan Gerhardt." Yeah, I was like, "What?" And he goes, "I want you to be one of the landscape guys, along with Skip Whitcomb, and Scott Christensen and Morgan Wiesling." So there was about 22 artists that were going to teach, and it was in Colorado Springs at one of the big hotel resorts there. And then the Plein Air guys would go off to like the different locations that they picked out for us to go to. And then the studio people, still life people, figurative people, like Jeremy Lipking was there. I'm sorry if I missed somebody, if you guys are watching. Anyway, so talking about geeking out, after we did our teaching, we would go into the hotel along with the students, and we would go to the bar. Everybody would order a drink or something, and it would just be nonstop geeking out over paintings and artwork, or whatever demo they did that day. Yeah. Or oh my God, some students so excited about meeting you, it's like they're meeting Tom Cruise or something. Right. It's like, I'm just little me, And they did that for about, I want to say 4 or 5 years. I think it was 4 years. And the last one that I did was in Dana Point, California, down at the beach. And that was a cool one because at that time, American Artists Magazine also had a magazine called Workshop Magazine. They came out with that. And one of the photographers took a picture of me as I was doing my demo at the workshop. I had like a demo that I did with about, 50, 60, maybe more people sitting watching me do a demo. Wow. And they put that on the front cover of the magazine.
Oh, that's awesome.
Totally surprised me. I had no idea until he goes, "Check this out." And he sent me the magazine, and I was like, "Oh my God." It wasn't my painting. It was just my mug from the side, painting like that. But I was totally like, okay, whatever. I don't care if it was my painting or not. Thank you.
Yeah. That's some good facial recognition going on.
Yeah, some more PR. But that was great. I was sad to see it dissolve. Eventually, American Artists Magazine doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. But just some wonderful things that happened at that time. And then that was one of the only times you would get together with somebody like that. In fact, Richard Schmid was there, right, teaching.
Right.
And his daughter Molly and I were friends, and Molly asked me to dinner with them one night, just us. And she asked me if I would drive the Subaru, and I said sure. So Richard Schmidt's in the passenger seat, and and I'm in the front. And it's the first conversation I ever had one-on-one, pretty much with Richard Schmid, like driving in the car, like being his chauffeur, going to the restaurant. I never imagined in my whole career that I'd be driving Richard Schmid to dinner,
Right.
And I got to ask him all these questions, and Molly and Nancy are sitting in the back seat. It was awesome.
Wow. That is incredible. That is so cool.
Yeah.
it's funny. You mentioned Tom Cruise and Richard Schmid, and if I had the choice to meet one of them, it would be Richard Schmid, hands down.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like Tom Cruise do some great stuff, but like I'd rather meet Richard Schmid for sure.
I was born and raised in LA, and I used to see things filmed down the street.
Yeah.
Movies. I'd go down to the coast or something and see something being filmed. And I never was really starstruck so much. But when it came to art, the first time I met Clyde, I literally was so freaking nervous. He was doing a demo at the Autry Museum during the Masters of the American West show. He did a demo. And I was sitting in the audience, and then afterwards I got to go, I wanted to meet him, so I pushed myself to go meet him. And I'm pretty much an extrovert. I'm not so much of an introvert. I'm not shy.
Yeah.
But geez, man, I was so nervous when I went up to him. I don't know if I fumbled my words or what, And so that was the first time I met him. But that was to me, like meeting Tom Cruise or somebody.
Right.
Yeah. Now we're buddies. I've been to his house. I've been to his old place when he lived in Clyde Park.
Oh,
I went over there with Aaron Schuer I was teaching in a workshop with Aaron Schuer up in Montana.
Yeah.
In the Paradise Valley there. And then we called up Clyde and said, hey, we're going to come and visit you at your studio. So we went over there, and that was pretty awesome. Now he lives in Bozeman and has this incredible studio. Oh my God. Yeah. It wasn't there when I first went to meet him up there. He only had the ground scraped. But since then, it's this beautiful studio that I need to go back up.
That is so cool. That is so awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like this is probably where we should kind of cut this off and end it.
Yeah.
But I love the history that you have in the art scene, and I love talking about these connections that you've made and these artist friends. And looking back on that experience, what would you say has been the best advice another artist has given you? Let's end on this. Like what's the best advice you've received from another artist that has just made a massive difference? Not necessarily as a painter, but just in general.
So it didn't come from an artist. Two things. One from my dad, and I think I mentioned it already. Don't think that don't get attached to your own work, basically.
Yeah.
Put it out there. Let collectors have it. Somebody wants something bad enough. There's a reason for that. Just let them have it, because it's gonna do more for your career than it is for you to keep staring at it in your own studio.
Yeah.
Another one was from a collector, because there was a point in my career, because none of our careers the trajectory just doesn't go like that.
Right.
It's just like it goes up and then also and then up and then down,
Yeah.
And you could be the best artist. You could be making tons of money right now, doing really great. But there's going to come a time when things are going to slow down. Things aren't going to, and you're going to go, got to start teaching again.
Right.
You make this commitment. I'm not going to teach anymore.
Right. That'll bite you in the butt.
in a perfect world, but it's not. So
yeah.
And having different revenue streams is important. I don't really sell much of prints. I did for a little while, but I like just selling originals. So I'd rather give somebody the opportunity to buy an original by giving them a payment plan or something like that to stretch it out.
Yeah.
So that they can have the original rather than buying a $200 print,
Yeah.
And then they can say they have an original. But to get back to what you're saying, the collector told me, just keep painting.
Yeah.
Because when things were really slow at that time, this collector came to buy some of my work, and I was being honest with them. I said, yeah, it's been really slow right now. And they go, well, all I could tell you is that you do great work, so just keep painting and the money will come.
Yeah.
That's, you could, yeah. And it doesn't matter. You could be the most popular person. You could be, the best artist, the worst artist. But the thing is you just need to keep painting, because eventually somebody will love. If you paint what you love, the love is going to show through.
Yeah.
And somebody's going to want some of that love. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I love that. That is a super high point to just end on. Frank, it has been awesome to have a conversation with you, and we've never connected before, and
not in person, no.
Yeah, and so this has been a real. I've been following your work for years, and have loved your stuff for a long time, and so it's really awesome to make this connection. And thank you so much for your time, imparting your experiences and your wisdom with us. I think it's going to be extremely valuable for everybody.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I believe you got to stay humble. You got to just absorb, don't think you know everything, because you don't,
right.
and I learned a lot of this from other painters and business owners and things like that. So, I do have to say, and speaking of your work, you're doing some fantastic wildlife painting. And early in my career with my friend Gabor, we used to love getting Wildlife Art magazine.
Okay.
I don't know if that is still around or not.
I don't even know if it is, honestly.
No, Wildlife Art. Because I loved animals, right?
Yeah.
I didn't paint a whole lot. I still do bison. If I go up to Yellowstone or Wyoming, Jackson Hole, I'm still into doing some bison paintings and stuff like that, because they're like cows. They kind of stay there for a while.
Right, right.
Antelope are kind of hard because they'll just run. But and I love painting moose once in a while. So I still have an itch to do that once in a great while.
Yeah.
But Wildlife Art magazine was one of those staple magazines I used to get a lot. And Rod Frederick and Isaac, I forget his last name, but a lot of those guys were like the creme de la creme of painters back then.
Right.
And that's when the print market was huge. So they would do a print run. Robert Lougheed, I have to say something about Robert Lougheed, because a lot of great painters learned from Robert Lougheed. He was a Canadian artist. He painted wildlife, painted cowboy scenes and stuff like that.
Beautiful
and
work.
He painted them plein air. He painted a lot of these scenes plein air.
Wow.
And Terry Moyers, John Moyers, Wayne Wolf, a lot of these painters that are still doing really great work right now learned a lot. So they turned me on to him. And he was one of those artists that I admired, because he could do an animal really well. So I love what you do.
Thank you.
And
I appreciate it.
do they even have a new magazine with wildlife, just for wildlife?
I don't know if there is. I don't think that, unless it's like a sporting magazine, but no.
Well, the magazines now, they, Art of the West and stuff, they promote you guys as well with the wildlife art.
Yeah. They do a good job at mixing it up pretty well. Yeah. So
very cool.
So thanks again, Frank.
For sure.
Great to meet you, and hopefully we get to connect again soon. So,
all right. So where are you living right now?
I'm just outside of Cody, Wyoming, in a little town called Powell. So you've been in the area, so you probably know it. Yeah.
Well, next time I'm up in that area, if I decide to go on a painting trip, I'll definitely call you up.
Yes, you'd better. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for the interview. That's great.
My pleasure. Yep.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Art podcast. If you're interested in resources and education to help you successfully create art and then sell it, please check out the Business of Art course in the link below. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.